Greetings and konnichiwa, and welcome to the Onyx Tavern. I'm your host, Rick the Barkeep, bringing you podcast 117 here at the Tavern, presented by Hirotaku.com. Well, we finally reached it, patrons. We are now at my response to Linkara's History of Power Rangers on RPM, which, as I've stated numerous times and is clear fact, is, I think, the worst season of Power Rangers ever. Now, I originally started these response to Linkara's History of Power Rangers for a number of reasons, particularly that I wanted to almost offer a counter opinion to what Linkara has in these videos. Now, the reason is that everything he's done up to Operation Overdrive, I've pretty much agreed with. I understand where he's coming from. He's looking at the series objectively as someone who was a fan and kind of got out of it, but he's still putting his own opinion in there, and we've pretty much agreed on similar things up to, again, Operation Overdrive. Once we got to Operation Overdrive, his opinion and mine really diverged, and I really thought it was kind of necessary to put my opinions out there, whereas I've never really done that before, and we just haven't had the opportunity to cover certain things on the Tavern. So I really wanted to say what I thought about, Operation Overdrive and Jungle Fury, simply because, again, his opinions and really the bulk of the fandom really disagrees with me on these points. I seem to be in the minority when I say I liked Operation Overdrive. I'm in the minority where I say I don't like Jungle Fury, things like that. And I'm certainly in the minority when I said that I hate RPM. And I actually created the I Hate RPM video as a precursor to his release once he established that he was going to have a schedule. And I kind of want to voice my opinion out there because, again, not many people are speaking out against RPM and the problems with the series, so I thought it was important that I do so. Plus, I thought it was good that if Linkara had listened to my podcast and my videos prior to that, he would have a more fair and balanced opinion on it. Because again, 99.9% of the Power Rangers community loves RPM, and then I'm, of course, in the vocal minority. And I didn't want him to go into it assuming that every Power Ranger fan liked it, and that there are some criticisms and problems with the series. Now, of course, to my surprise, there were other people who don't like it, and he obviously stated that in his video. Although, frankly, I just like to think that every criticism of the series that's pointed out that he mentions is coming directly from me. I'm not really that egotistical, but I sent him my video, so it's all there. He obviously had. I seriously believe he did watch my video before really doing this, so I'd like to thank him for that if he indeed did that. Because again, I just think you just can't be single-minded about it, and that seems to be what the community is very single-minded about RPM. And I really debated whether or not I should actually do this video, because I said everything I wanted to say in my Reasons I Hate RPM video. Linkara mentioned the controversies and the criticisms of the series in his video. But I had so many people messaging me saying, hey, what's your response? I want to hear what you have to go ahead and say, based on what Linkara said and all that. And I watched the video when it first came out, so I got a chance to listen to everything that Linkara said, and I sat on it for a while. I didn't want to do immediate reaction. Typically, when I do that, I get a little passionate about it, and I really didn't want to attack Linkara or anything, because again, I definitely respect his opinion. So I waited a little bit. I rewatched the video today just to write some notes and some things, and now I think I'm prepared to really kind of respond. I don't want to retread anything that I did say in the I Hate RPM video, which, guys, if you want, go ahead and re-listen to that. But I did want to point out a few things that Linkara had said, some minor new information that I think is somewhat relevant here, and just kind of give my thoughts on it, because again, a lot of these things I really didn't cover in my hatred of RPM, and really, again, I have a counter opinion based on what Linkara is saying. So, with that said, let me point this out, because what a lot of people don't really understand about my opinion is I do think it is the worst Power Rangers series of all time. I do think it's there on the bottom. Mystic Force is or not Mystic Force, Mega Force is probably right above that, as well as Super Mega Force. But right now I still consider RPM to be at the bottom. And the way I would sum up RPM, and I don't know if I did this in my original video, but right now, the way I sum up RPM is it had some good things in it and had some good ideas, but was overall disappointing in its execution. So the thing I actually noticed about Linkara's videos is that he really put a lot of the positive stuff in his 4-part series, where he did highlight all the good things in there, but he really didn't focus too much on the negative aspects. Again, it is his opinion, and this is the way he chooses to go ahead and present it. But if I was doing it, I would have presented all the negative stuff first to highlight that. I just kind of get the feeling that if you watched his video without watching RPM, you wouldn't realize the true negatives of the series. Because he addresses them, but he doesn't highlight them. Yes, he does make mention to the can in the refrigerator and the talent show, but he does spend a great amount of his time talking about all the positives and not really talking too much about the negatives. And that is his right to do so. I just wish he would have put more of the negatives in there. That way people could have understood it a little bit more and talked more about the plot holes in the series, as I did, such as, again, with the talent show, letting Tonight 7 in there without any identification, things like that. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about that he didn't really kind of bring up. Now, he did address one of the issues I did have, which was the criminal organizations within Corinth, particularly the Scorpions and Fresno Bob. And I will say, Fresno Bob is a decent, humorous name. I really had no problem with that. But the way Linkara kind of describes it in his video is that the cartels are, in essence, a necessary evil, that if the government can't get a hold of something, they need to rely on the cartels for that kind of stuff. The fact that the Rangers are able to go to Fresno Bob without incident says the government may be complicit or turning a blind eye to their activities. And while I understand why he thinks the reason the cartels exist is natural based on that, I still don't like the concept of the cartels. Because we are at the end of the world, basically. It is the apocalypse, and you're the few humans that are surviving in the world. Why would you turn to crime, exactly? Why is crime a motivating factor? And let me put it in this context for you guys to better understand. One of my favorite movies is Kill Bill Volumes 1 and 2. And the best thing about that movie, I think the absolute best thing about that movie is the character of Bill himself. Bill is just an amazing villain, amazing movie villain, amazing actor to play him. It was just great. I loved Bill all the way throughout those series of films. Now, let us assume that Bill is Fresno Bob. Then instead of Fresno Bob and RPM, you have the character of Bill, and instead of the Scorpions, you have the Vipers. You have Black Mamba, you have Lucy Liu, you have all those characters. Let's say that instead of the Scorpions, you have Bill and all his characters in there. Would Bill act the same way as Fresno Bob does? I would say no. Granted, Fresno Bob and Bill are two completely different people, but I would imagine that that Bill would act more compassionate than, say, Fresno Bob does. And what do I mean by that? Fresno Bob is looking out for his own interests. He's trying to get revenge against Ziggy. He's trying to get more money. He's trying to go ahead and control things. He's looking out for his best interests. Whereas a character like Bill, who is a much deadlier threat, more scheming, more calculating, just more evil overall, would recognize the situation that he is in and would change to the situation at hand. And what do I mean by that? There is an episode in which Fresno Bomb makes a deal with Tanaya. The deal goes bad, and they end up fighting each other and resolves Ziggy's plot and so forth. If it was Bill in that place, who's a very competent crime syndicate bad guy, he would just have killed Tanaya 7 right then and there. Because Bill realizes that there is more to him. At least that's what I assume he would do if Quentin Tarantino was writing the episode. Bill is enough of a human being that he would not put himself above the survival of humanity, whereas Fresno Bomb puts himself above the survival of humanity, which is why he tries to make a deal with Tanaya 7, which is why he still does this criminal activity. Which, to me, makes Bill more human than Fresno Bomb, and makes Fresno Bomb, in a sense, even more evil than Bill is. And Bill's a sadistic bastard, I'll tell you that right now, guys. So, the existence of Bob and whatever he does not make sense. Linkara said, it's like able to get things that the government can't. What can the government not get that's available within the city that they live in? Because I don't remember the episode where Fresno Bob went through the desert to Vengeance's headquarters to steal something. I don't even think that Bill or whoever else you want to go ahead and talk about, throw in any movie gangster or something, or crime boss, the Godfather could not have done any of that stuff. I just think that Bob is a poorly written character, and the situation of the cartels is poorly implemented within the story because you have characters putting themselves above the survival of humanity. And I seriously believe that if it was the end of the world, we wouldn't have this particular situation. And as I've stated before, just one final example, when we talk about Terminator, for all the problems that Salvation had, I cannot recall a scene in that film where you had a crime syndicate who was working with the machines or making deals with machines, or trying to make money over the survival of humanity. You know why that scene's not there? Because it doesn't make sense. It's illogical. It doesn't fit in the universe that you're creating. So while I applaud Linkara for trying to come up with an explanation for the cartels, they just don't ultimately make sense, because any gangster, mobster, Bill, the Godfather, otherwise that you place in there would have realized that I need to stop what I'm doing, and I need to help people as best I can for the survival of humanity, and maybe when the world is saved, I might go back to my old ways. That's just the way I would go ahead and look at it. So that's one thing I want to go ahead and point out. He also points out, Linkara does, that the self-referential humor is a positive within the series. I completely disagree with that. Because the thing is, too many people make fun of Power Rangers already, especially when they don't understand the series. They think it's for children, they think it's juvenile, they think it's stupid, yet they don't actually sit down and watch the series and try to go ahead and understand it. The fact that the Power Rangers are making fun of themselves while other people make fun of them is very insulting, I think. Why do we need to address the RPM getting gear stuff? Why they have to call that out? I think we've already established way back in the Zordon era that you need to call out these names to activate. I think that was in the very first episode. Zordon said if you call out Tyrannosaurus, and then you'll transform. You have to go ahead and do that. That's something that's been pre-established. The anime eyes on there. I thought we talked about the fact that they were designed by a child, in this case Dr. K, so of course they would go ahead and look like that. And the whole thing about the explosions, again, I think we've talked about that in the series before, and of course, using the self-referential humor as a weapon in the show, that is ridiculous to me. This gets into the whole comic relief, and he recognizes that people like me don't like the comic relief because it doesn't gel with the other serious nature of the show. And he states if you don't have the comic relief, then you're too dark and brooding, full of angst and whatnot. I forget his exact wording. But I would argue that you can have humor in the show without going to comedic extremes. And what's a comedic extreme? A talent show, a gun in the refrigerator. I mean, again, I've talked about why the gun should not be in the refrigerator. But does that really make people laugh? Are people amused by that? Oh, they got a gun in the refrigerator. That's awesome. But again, if you logically think about it from an in-universe perspective, there is no reason why there should be a gun in the refrigerator. Yet it's said to lighten the mood and funny imagery and that kind of stuff. And haha, it's the end of the world, but we have a gun in the refrigerator. Isn't that funny? No, that's not. I mean, there are ways you can have humor in the series. I just don't think that the way that they did it was entirely appropriate to the situation. I mean, again, let's go back to the talent show. And I know I keep bringing that up, but that is like People's Exhibit A, basically. There was a way that you could have injected humor into that particular episode without doing it. I mean, the scene where Ziggy is being held up by Tanaya on the scooter and he uses the windshield wiper fluid to disorient her. Okay, that's funny. I get that. That kind of lightens the mood, but he is still able to get away. It flows naturally from the story. But when your setting is the end of the world, you can't do a lot of the things that RPM did. And again, I'd like to say that I've explained that a number of times. And I do believe you can have comic relief. They just needed to do it in another way. They needed to call in somebody who was actually good with comedy. Not to say that some of these writers probably aren't good with comedy, but they just didn't get it right. The comedy did not flow naturally from the situation, and that's something that I found to be problematic. In addition with that, he also said that Jim and Gemma were very grating and annoying throughout the series. I disagree with that, just because I liked their little telepathic finishing each other's sentences. I thought that worked well. I didn't see that to be an issue there. I do agree with him on a couple of things, believe it or not. The shaky cam stuff, yeah, RPM did not need that. I don't know why shaky cam is a thing, has been a thing, or is still a thing. I will not watch a film if it does shaky cam, which is why I've never seen Blair Witch, and I choose not to see Cloverfield. So, I agree with him on the monsters, how they didn't talk, but I want to go a little bit deeper into that because he does make a valid point about the villains on how Kilobyte, is endowed with all these human characteristics of honor, sexism, which he briefly touched upon, but didn't go into as much detail as I did on that. I wonder why, in this particular series, we found it necessary to even have the villains present. And I'll tell you what I mean. Something I've been noticing for a long time on Power Rangers in particular, and we see this in a lot of other shows, is that we see what the motivations of the villains are. We have all our heroes and see what they're doing, but then we cut to the villains and see what they're planning and seeing what they're up to. And I always wondered why we kind of did this. How come we never just left the villains in the background, let them be enigmatic and, a mystery? Like, we, the audience, are only following the perception of the Power Rangers in what they're doing, and thus we are surprised when they are surprised. And I think that in RPM, this was an excellent opportunity to do that with our villains. Consider that Venjix is a computer program. Why would he actually need to program other robots to do his bidding and to have a conversation with him? What was the point of giving Kilobyte these human characteristics, or even having Tanaya as a human cyborg hybrid and having her interact with everybody? I'm thinking that if we eliminated the villains, and if Venjix was just this thing that was out there where we never got to hear a monologue. We never got to see Crusher or Shifter or Kilobyte or Tanaya 7. If Tanaya 7 wasn't even a thing, how much more interesting would it have been with the villains if we didn't know the motivation? If Venjix was always a mystery in what he was doing? Because I'm almost imagining, to think of an original episode of Power Rangers from Season 1, and what if you cut out every scene with Rhea Repulsa and Goldar and Scorpina and Squat and Babu? What if you never saw the villains? And then the Rangers were only reacting to what was happening, and we, the audience, are seeing it the same way they are. Because how many times have we seen episodes where the villains will plant a trap, and then the Rangers don't know about, but we as the audience know about because we saw what Lord Zed was saying. I mean, in the recent interview I did with Sabrina Liu, I remember that episode and went to watch it, and Goler's vice versa. And the thing is, we have in that episode where we find out that Zed is planning to send somebody after Adam, Scorpina revealing herself in the shadows when the other Rangers are not listening, and yet we have a scene in there where Kimberly becomes suspicious of Sabrina because of something that Mrs. Appleby says. Now, what if we eliminated Lord Zed and Scorpina's reveal, and when we actually got to Mrs. Appleby, that is the moment in which we start questioning what's happening, like, well, what's going on? You see what I'm saying? It would be a little bit more powerful if we did that, and since Venjix is a computer virus and a program all to his own, if we never saw him in the series, I wonder if that would make things a lot better, because then we are completely surprised by his motivations and when we see him in the body. I don't know. It's stuff like that that really kind of made me think, because why do they need to talk? And then we get into the conversation of why does Kilobyte feel the need to be sexist? That's the stuff that I'm trying to go ahead and refer to. So I will go ahead and say that Linkara did make me think about that point, that I do think RPM would be better if we did not even engage with the villains. And as I've already said, Tenai 7 is a horrible villain. We retread old territory. I'm glad Linkara picked up that as well with the whole Astronema thing. It was just kind of pointless. I didn't see the need of that. Something else he says that I kind of disagree with, and I kind of evaluate this kind of back and forth, is he thinks that the best character in all of RPM is Dr. K. And while I will agree that Dr. K has a very good and established backstory, I hardly think she's the best character within the series. Again, my favorite character was Flynn, and he also acknowledged he's basically Scottish Chief O'Brien. And I think he was great for the reasons I had mentioned way back when. But the problem with Dr. K is I think it almost falls in her portrayal in... Okay, Dr. K is a well-written character. Let's put it that way. On paper, she works. But I think when you have her acted out by her actress, I think that's a role that probably needs to be recast. That if I was working on RPM, I would say, yeah, it's good on paper, but the actress we have is not working out. Now, who would I cast? I don't know who I would cast, but when the more I think about it, even though Dr. K is a good character, again, in theory, the way you have written and the good backstory, I just can't say she's the best character from what we actually got in the series. So, don't want to go too much into that, but I do want to disagree with him on that point. He also brings up the whole thing about the sleeper agents. Now, yes, Venjix is the darkest and most successful villain that we've had in the series up to that point, and even up to now, I would go ahead and say. That being said, a lot of what Venjix does is implied, but not really fully stated. And what do I mean by that? Okay. So, we have the sleeper agents. We find out that they are, half robotic and they're planted there by Venjix. We know that because part of them is robotic, that they've had to have their arms cut off and they were mutilated and all that kind of stuff. Memories altered, erased, whatever and stuff. That all is implied. But as they say in film, show, don't tell. So, where was that scene where we have our human characters lying on the table with a drill above them or needles being injected and limbs coming off and all that kind of gruesome stuff that you would expect? I mean, and again, I'm going to make a Star Trek reference here, but in First Contact, that's exactly what we saw. We saw that the Borg were assimilating the crew, taking their arms off, replacing their eyes, injecting them, all that terrible, horrible stuff. We were shown the horrors of the Borg. We are not shown the horrors of Venjix. Again, it's implied, but we're not shown it. We have a newspaper headline that says Europe was destroyed. Well, where's that scene where Europe was destroyed, where Big Ben is blown up, or where Greece is taken over, or the Vatican is overrun by robots and stuff? We don't see that, do we? We don't see in Africa where the African militia is fighting off the robots but end up failing, and those people are dying by the hundreds and things like that. We never see what happens. We see the result of that, and there are a few battle sequences in there. But the thing is that all his villainy and all the horrible things he's done is implied throughout the series. We don't actually see it. Even when we have Dylan, a character that we stay with throughout the entire series, we don't see how horrible it is to be Dylan, how horrible it was to undergo all of that. Yes, it's depressing. Yes, it's sad. But again, where is that scene where he's being operated on? Where are the shots of nuclear bombs falling and killing millions of people at once? Where are the screaming mothers and the crying children and all that? I mean, okay, yes, it is a show for kids, but doesn't mean you can't show the true horror of the situation. Because I think that's what it lacks. One of the issues that I've always had is it never feels like it's the end of the world, that there's no sense of urgency in what they're doing. And when Linkara pointed these sleeper agents, it was like, it makes sense now why I kind of feel that way, because we are not shown what is actually going on. We're not shown the humans being experimented on or exterminated. There's a shot where we found out that a kid, probably no more 10, 11 years old, is, cybernetic. But we don't get to explore the horror of that reality. It's implied to us, but we're not shown how terrible that exactly is. So while that is dark in of itself, I just don't feel it. When you juxtapose a child being mutilated by a machine with a gun in the refrigerator, it just doesn't mesh. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. Now, the last thing I really want to go ahead and talk about is, when I did my evaluation of RPM, I did it based on what I see on the screen, the universe itself. Now, Linkara went the extra mile to go ahead and talk about the behind-the-scenes stuff with the Gazillion and the writing staff and the changeover and all that. Now, I want to go ahead and make this point as well. I don't particularly care about what happened behind the scenes in this particular case. Because the fact of the matter is, no matter what Gazillion planned, no matter what was going on with the budget, what was going on with the scripts, the changeover in writers, or anything like that, the fact of the matter is, a bad show was produced in the end. So I'm not going to give the show any sympathy by saying, well, it was a bad show, but let's forgive it because the production was a nightmare and all these types of problems. Well, yeah, but the production for Jaws was a nightmare, and yet they were able to make a very successful movie. So, I guess some people will say it's apples to oranges and stuff, but the thing is, the plights of the production don't bother me because the ultimate result was a bad show. They had these ideas, but they just didn't make them go anywhere, I think. So, and it's even like with Gazillion, it's like he wanted to do a serious show, and I applaud him for doing that, but it is kind of an uphill battle as well, because apparently Gazillion never worked on Power Rangers and never had any work in live action, which, I'm going to be honest here, I think it's Disney's fault that a lot of this did happen, simply because they put somebody in charge who was completely inexperienced with what they were supposed to be doing. Now, it seems to me, since Disney was like, well, it's the last season, so who the hell cares? I think that really kind of hurt everything, because I think if Disney had actually cared about the series, that they wanted to make something good, then they would have put somebody in the position who had worked on live action, who had worked on Power Rangers, was familiar with it. I'm not saying Gazillion isn't a good writer or good anything. I'm just saying that, let me put it to you this way. If you were playing football and you had 30 seconds left and you had 30 yards to go and you need a touchdown to win the game, you're not going to go ahead and put your third string quarterback who hasn't seen any playing time all year in front of your Pro Bowl All-Star MVP selection. And that's kind of what Disney did, is that it seems to me that Disney set RPM up to fail in that regard. And I don't know why they would want to go ahead and fail. Again, it gets to the whole thing of why Disney did not like Power Rangers and why they were, as Linkara puts it, quote, embarrassed by it. But that all being said, it's nice to know the behind-the-scenes stuff. But again, at the end of the day, I think a bad show was made, and I mean, that's pretty much it. I'm not going to give RPM any credit saying, yeah, Disney was screw you, but in spite of adversity, you should have made a better product than what you did. So yeah, that's all I really have to go ahead and say. Again, I think I've retreaded some territory from before. I've talked a lot about, again, why I hate it in the previous video, but these were just some things that I wanted to point out that he said in his video, not to just disagree with him, but to point out, what I think, since I really haven't talked too much about some of those points. But I hope all of you that were looking forward to this video are satisfied. I mean, again, this is my opinion. This is what I think. You can think what you want. But I just don't want you guys to go in there and say RPM was the best because everybody says it was the best. But really watch it, think for yourself, and realize that RPM had the potential, but just did not deliver on it for a number of reasons. And at the end of the day, it is one of the weaker Power Ranger shows where it implies a lot of good stuff, but it doesn't deliver that. So, all right. Well, I think I'm done with this. So, what do you guys think? Comment below. Let me know. Otherwise, I will see you next time on the Tavern with another topic. So, thank you for listening. Have a good evening. And the Tavern is now closed.